I can see Mr. Pillsbury is quite inspired by Sachin Tendulkar's session just before this. But one of your specializations really is to compare comprehensive national power. And if you were to give us your ranking, where do you see, relative to the United States, China stand at this moment? Where does India stand in your global matrix? And where do you see things move from here?
Well, the only places in the world that this kind of question is answered are secret places inside governments. The Russians have a unit that measures the balance of power. We have a unit that measures the balance of power. And so does India, frankly. So does China. I first got onto the idea of the book, The 100-Year Marathon, by visiting some Chinese experts who were working 20 years into the future. They were measuring what would China have to do to become the #1 power in the world. I could not find that kind of thinking in Moscow or Washington or Delhi or Tokyo. But the Chinese were thinking ahead, what exactly do we have to do to surpass all other powers? And they recruited the World Bank, of all people, to open its largest office in the world, 3,000 people in Beijing, to advise China what to do about their state-owned enterprises. And they came up with a phrase I'd never heard before, called national champions. At that point, China had 0 companies on what's called the Fortune 500 list of the companies in the world that are the most capitalized. Now, recently, China has surpassed America. They went from 0 to 140 of their companies on this list. America's about 120. India is much lower. This is a joke, actually, they even had a billionaires index. Who had how many billionaires? In the beginning of this process, China had 0. Guess what? 3 years ago, China has more billionaires than America. Now, some indicators are a joke. They surpassed us in beer drinking. Okay, I can live with that. But the measurement of the balance of power, I've heard people at the conference today talk about India's #5 or India's #6. That's what the Chinese were 30 years ago. And they had a series of measures to get up to #2 and moving toward #1. But again, this is secret work done inside governments. And the Chinese, to my amazement, you would think as their progress went from #6 to #2, you would think they would be like a good World Soccer Cup, take credit, say we're #1 and hope for applause. The Chinese stopped the World Bank and IMF from announcing that China's economy had surpassed America. They want to play all this down. They're very sensitive from their ancient literature. Never brag, never get a rival to rise up against you. So play dumb, play weak, which we still find them doing. Some of the scenes that showed the PLA marching, this is not what they prefer to present to the world. They like to show Chinese ballet, Chinese opera, Chinese art. There's a new policy that began in the last 10 years that Confucius is now the symbol of China. So Xi Jinping went to Confucius' hometown, signed some books, starts quoting from Confucius. This is what China wants to project. Don't worry about us. We're not going to become the #1 power in history. We're just raising people up out of poverty in China. And as we do that, by accident, we become the world's greatest power. So this is what we face.
Speaking of Confucius, Confucius says that there can't be 2 suns in the world, nor 2 emperors on the earth. Where do you think China sees India at this moment?
Actually, I know quite a bit about that because I used to raise the question of India with the Chinese. A lot of Americans thought over the last 50 or 60 years there would be kind of a horse race with China and India, the 2 horses. And everybody thought India will surpass China. Democracy, speaks English, rule of law, the Communist Party quite weak. So there was no contest. But then it turned out the opposite. China pulled way ahead of India in almost every indicator. So why did this happen? It looks like the American decision to invest heavily in China and to sell or give all American scientific discoveries to China, which we do by an agreement. Same thing with technology. We, the United States government, favored China over India for the last 40 years. And you'll find this discussed both in Dr. Jaishankar's book, The India Way, and the former Foreign Secretary Saran's book, How India Sees the World. The Indian government knew this. They knew that America was blocking the transfer to India of high technology since 1974 for various reasons. So even though we thought the Indian horse would win the race, in fact what happened is we helped the Chinese horse, which ultimately ends up 4 or 5 times larger and more technologically advanced than India. Now this has begun to change, but it's still not totally changed. Our trade with India still is not as high as with China. We're increasing our investment in China. Even after all the Xi Jinping aggressive moves, American investment in China is increasing. So the India moment is important, but there's also a China moment coming, which I believe they want to keep secret and play down. That they're so powerful now, they don't want a coalition formed against them.